It's June 2025 and I'm on final approach to the capital of... Nope, not even going to attempt to pronounce that. Let's just call it the Outer Hebrides. Stornoway is the largest settlement on the island of Lewis, accounting for around a third of the total population of the Outer Hebrides, also known as the Western Isles, and the only part of Scotland where Scots Gaelic is the majority language. Lewis and Harris, in fact one island, but different enough geographically to be considered separate, are the largest of the more than 100 islands, islets and skerries located between 25 and 40 miles west of mainland Scotland that make up the Outer Hebrides. The island chain is separated from mainland Scotland and the Inner Hebrides by 3 continuous bodies of water. The Minch between the Northern Isles of Lewis and Harris and Sutherland on the mainland, the Little Minch between the Middle Islands of the Archipelago and Skye, and the Sea of the Hebrides between the Southern Islands and the small isles of Egg, Canna, Rum and Muck. Both Skye and the small isles, along with more islands to the south that hug the mainland Scottish coastline, are collectively called the Inner Hebrides. Only 15 of the islands are permanently inhabited, with Lewis and Harris, the largest physically at 841 of the island's total 1,180 square miles, accounting for close to 2/3 of the population of the island, Stornoway itself being home to just over 8,000 of the 26,000 residents of the Western Isles. Perhaps one of the most famous of Lewis's children is Mary Ann MacLeod. Born in Tong, just north of Stornoway in May 1912, she would go on to marry American real estate developer and businessman Fred Trump in 1936 and have 5 children, her 4th child becoming one of the few people who've managed to bankrupt their own casino. Today, the administrative and political centre of the islands, as well as an important port, the town was founded by Vikings in the early 9th century, taking advantage of a large sheltered natural harbour. The town soon grew, becoming an important hub for people from across the islands who came here by boat or horse for onward travel and trade into Scotland and further afield. The island spent most of their post-Viking history in private ownership, with various clans and then royal favourites owning the land. The island was transferred from royal control to the Mackenzies of Seaforth in 1610. In 1844, the whole of the island was sold by the Mackenzies to Scottish opium trader Sir James Matheson. If you didn't think being a drug kingpin was bad enough, Sir James built himself a luxurious castle, Lews Castle, on land opposite the harbour, clearing more than 500 families off their land by arranging their emigration to Canada. So that's drug running and people trafficking on the rap sheet. To his possible credit, he was instrumental in a programme of improvements on the island, including drainage schemes and road construction, with a programme being stepped up during the 1850 Highland potato famine to provide wages. The Mathesons didn't have any children, so after their deaths, the estate passed first to James' nephew Donald and then his great-grandnephew Duncan Matheson. In 1918, Duncan sold the island to the first Viscount Leverhulme, William Lever, who with his brother James had built up the Lever brothers' business of soap manufacturing, helped by his strong belief in the expansion of the British Empire to help supply the palm oil the company was using in its products. As Wikipedia states, by 1911 the firm had become associated with activities in the Belgian Congo, which is never an innocent statement. William only held the island for a short time as various business setbacks overstretched his finances, so he gave the Stornoway parish to the people of the town. During World War II, the aerodrome was used by the military as a base for anti-submarine planes and as a fuelling station, with the castle being turned into a hospital. Strong observance of the Sabbath has long been associated with Hebridean culture, with Lewis and Harris being some of the most ardent observers of the day of rest. It wasn't until October 2002 that the first Sunday flights to Stornoway Airport began, with the ferry to Ullapool only docking on a Sunday for the first time in July 2009. As of June 2025, there are still no bus services on the island on a Sunday, and only a limited number of restaurants and cafes open in town. November the 17th, 2024 saw a major change when Tesco started opening the Stornoway supermarket for limited hours on a Sunday. The town centre is home to the shops, cafes and restaurants as well as the cinema, but the majority of sites for tourists are located on the opposite side of the Bayhead River, in and around the grounds of Lews Castle. The castle, along with the grounds, passed into the hands of the town in 1923 when Lord Leverhulme gave away ownership, meaning that today the grounds are open for public 24/7 to explore. Located on the opposite side of the Bayhead River from the harbour, the castle grounds cover around 687 acres of land between the Bayhead River and just beyond the Creed River, and with a mix of paths and trails covering the site. There are dedicated mountain biking routes, as well as many miles of paths for walking around and taking in the scenery. The main castle building was constructed between 1844 and 1851 as a country house for Sir James Matheson on the back of his drug money, sorry legitimate earned fortune from the Chinese opium trade. Whilst building during the Victorian era, it was designed to look like a medieval castle with crenellated towers. After the estate passed to the people of Stornoway in 1923, the castle was used for various functions, including as accommodation for 700 Naval Air Squadron, who operated from the castle's slipway using supermarine walrus aircraft. At the time, the castle was known as HMS Mentor. Following the war, the castle became accommodation for students of Lews Castle College, which opened in 1953. Eventually, the whole of the college moved on to its own accommodation immediately to the northwest of the castle and is now a campus for the University of the Highlands and Islands. Following the college's departure, the castle building remained abandoned for several decades. The building was listed in 1971, and in 2011 the Castle and Council were awarded £4.6 million by the Heritage Lottery Fund to convert it into a museum and cultural centre. The ground floor of the building, including the fully restored morning room and neighbouring ballroom, are open to the public to look around during the day when they're not being used for events. The upper floors of the castle building are now an apart hotel, so only accessible by residents. Immediately behind the main castle building, and in parts built on the site of the family's former greenhouses, is the bilingual Museum and Archives of the Isles, a small museum dedicated to telling the story, in Gaelic and English, of the Outer Hebrides through interviews, artefacts and more. And, as it's only fitting for the Isle of Lewis, the museum houses 6 of the Lewis chessmen, the 12th century walrus ivory carved chess pieces that were discovered on a sandbank at the head of Uig Bay on the west coast of Lewis in 1831. The originals are now split between the British Museum in London and the Scottish National Museum in Edinburgh, with the 6 on long-term loan to Stornoway being from the British Museum's collection. Outside of the castle itself, the extensive grounds are open for the public to wander around, ranging from the formal lawns directly in front of the castle building, from where there's some of the best views back across the estuary of the Bayhead River and the waters of the harbour itself to the centre of Stornoway, following the coastal path round the edge of the estate, you trace the edge of the natural harbour all the way round until you reach the Creed River, where it empties into the harbour around the picturesque Greta Island. And then follow the Creed River back upstream as its calm, smooth flow into the harbour becomes slightly more frenetic as the cascades and white water, only a couple of hundred metres back upstream, show the true nature of the river. From here, you can follow the path back towards the castle buildings or take a detour up Gallows Hill for views out over the harbour and the town. The hill is named for the gallows that would have been erected here in the times the clans when they needed to carry out an execution. Heading back down towards the castle, and you pass the Gruffalo Trail, where the characters from the children's novel Mouse, Fox, Owl, Snake, and finally the Gruffalo itself have been carved from wood. From the Gruffalo Trail, it's a short walk through the wooded paths for grounds to the Sunken Gardens, a Victorian-designed formal garden laid out over multiple terraces, which, once the bulk of the visitors have gone home for the evening, appears to come alive with rabbits, as there were dozens grazing on the grass or lounging the bushes as I came past. At the northeastern corner of the estate, and now facing the main road leading through the town, is the Porter's Lodge. The integrated castellated gateway and lodge were built at the same time as the castle and would have acted as a grand entrance to the estate. At one point, the lodge had been added to the buildings at risk register, with the windows boarded up and graffiti across parts of the structure, and whilst the building doesn't appear to be in regular use, it was looking in pretty decent condition in June 2025. Continuing around the northeast side of the estate, following the Bayhead River back upstream, you reach the Stornoway Waterwheel. The mill is also known as Latta's Mill, named after John Latta, who died there after an accident in 1834. The original mill was built by the Mackenzie family before they sold the island to John Matheson, and is an example of an overshot corn mill, where a small mill pond supplies a flow of water that falls down on the top of the water wheel, turning it, which in turn turns the axle and powers the mill. The original mill on the site was destroyed by fire in 1890, and the current building is a relatively recent recreation, though some of the original equipment, including the millstone and parts of the wheel, are still in situ. Less than half a mile away from the Waterwheel, but located at the highest point in the town, is the Isle of Lewis First World War Memorial, a 28-foot high tower built from local gneiss stone and dressed with Aberdeenshire granite. The memorial is dedicated to the men from Lewis who lost their lives during World War I, and to those who survived the war only to lose their lives whilst returning home during the 1919 sinking of His Majesty's yacht Eilean. Due to their backgrounds in fishing and other sea-related activities, large numbers of young men from the Isle of Lewis had served with the Royal Navy during the First World War. At the end of December 1918, hundreds of them were granted leave from their bases at Devonport and Portsmouth and made the long journey back north to home. On New Year's Eve, they reached the Carloway Broch by train, and due to the numbers, the Navy had sent the steam yacht Eilean to meet the trains, as the existing McBrain ferry between Carl and Stornoway was too small to carry the expected number of passengers. Trains arrived at Carl at 6:15 and 7 p.m. with about 320 men between them. Somewhere between 27 and 30 embarked on the McBrain-operated Sheila, whilst the remainder boarded the Eilean. Sources differ to the numbers who boarded, but all values are significantly more than the ship should have had on board. She departed Carl around 7:30, with the Sheila setting off at 8 p.m. Whilst the two ships were crossing the Minch around midnight, the wind picked up in intensity. At the mouth of Stornoway Harbour, the ship passed a fishing vessel called Spider. The skipper of the Spider later testified that Eilean's course was too far to the starboard, bringing her close to the rocks on the east side of the harbour mouth. At 01:50, she struck a group of rocks called the Beasts of Holm and listed, throwing 50 to 60 men overboard. Strong waves struck the yacht, hampering attempts by the passengers to leave the ship, which by now was just 20 yards from land. Around 3:15, a wave toppled the yacht over, leaving just her masts exposed, and swept away any men who were still trying to evacuate. The precise death toll was never known, but it's somewhere between 201 and 205 men killed, adding to the 800 to 1,000 that had been killed during the war. At the start of World War I, around 29,000 people were living on Lewis and Harris, so the loss of so many young lives devastated the island. Just 12 months later, in January 1920, a public meeting was held to organise a memorial to the men of the island who'd lost their lives in the war and the sinking. A fundraising campaign took place to raise the estimated £10,000 required to erect the memorial, with Lord Leverhulme, then owner of the island, donating half that amount. In the end, the memorial was able to be erected for just £4,000. The memorial was completed in June 1924, with internal fitting and installation of the memorial plaques completed by the August. Due to the deterioration of the stonework and internal staircase, the tower was closed for public in 1975. In 2002, the tower still inaccessible, the memorial plaques were relocated outside and placed on stones bordering a new viewing path. Following the Second World War, an additional stone cross was added at the base of the tower and further plaques added with the names of the fallen. At 60 miles long and 37 miles at its widest point, the Isle of Lewis and Harris is the largest of the islands of the Outer Hebrides, and its northernmost point is the Butt of Lewis. And I headed here as part of a day-long tour around the north of the Isle of Lewis from Stornoway. Head 200 miles due north and you reach the southern tip of the Faroe Islands. It's 2,000 miles of open ocean to the due west before you hit the shores of Labrador. Slightly less impressively, it's just 40 miles due east and you hit the Sutherland coast of northern Scotland. Its exposed position, the first land to be hit this far north after coming across the Atlantic, lead to the area being reportedly the windiest location in the United Kingdom, although on the day I visited, everything was incredibly calm. Due to the rocks and treacherous waters, it was only natural the lighthouse was built here. Constructed by David Stevenson, who helped build over 30 lighthouses around the coast of Scotland, it was completed in 1862. Unlike many other lighthouses, the actual tower is left as unpainted stone. It's not known for certain what the fuel for the early lighthouse was, but it's suspected it was fish oil. That was quickly replaced with a paraffin burner in 1869, before finally being electrified 107 years later in 1976. The lighthouse was operated by 3 keepers who lived at the station with their families up until the end of March 1998, at which point it was automated and monitored from Edinburgh. Until the early 1960s, all supplies had to be delivered by sea to the nearby Port Stoff, where small cargo vessels would regularly berth, if the weather allowed them to offload provisions. It wasn't until the road system on the island was upgraded in the 1960s that the lighthouse could be supplied via road from the larger port in Stornoway. Although, even to today, supplies during the winter months can be limited. During the worst months of November to January, the Calmac ferry can regularly be cancelled for multiple days, leading to reductions in availability of initially bread and milk, and then fresh fruit and vegetables. From the Butt of Lewis, the tour turned to the south to start a journey down the west coast of the island, with every mile further south heading back further through time. Our next scheduled stop was to head down to Arnol to visit the Blackhouse. But there were a couple of quick stops along the way to visit the port of Ness, home to a picturesque small harbour, and the Shieling at Brue. This is a small hut that was used well into the 20th century by crofters when they take their sheep out onto the moors for grazing during the summer months before returning to their main home during the winter. And that main home, for many centuries, would have been a blackhouse. Constructed from very thick, low stone walls topped with a straw or turf roof and resembling an upturned Viking longboat, the house is the main form of shelter on the island. The buildings get their name because of their lack of chimneys. On the island, the primary fuel source is peat, with the large peat bogs and moors on the island having been cut for fuel for centuries. As the peat burnt in the closed environment, the smoke and soot would coat all of the surfaces of the house, turning them black. The design of the Blackhouse is similar across the whole of the island, with 2 long interconnected buildings, both covered with individual thatched roofs. The outer of the 2 buildings would not have been heated and would have been used for storage. Whilst the inner of the 2 would have had a peat fire directly on the floor, which was used for heating and cooking. Behind the main room would have been bedrooms, whilst across the central divide, the back half of the home would have been where the animals such as sheep or a cow were kept. Most of the black houses on the island have been lost to time as the roofs quickly rot away to nothing if not maintained, though their stone structures still stand across Lewis. In many cases, as residents moved into new built homes that were part paid for by the council, the stipulation for receiving the grant money was they had to make their black house uninhabitable, and the quickest way of doing that was to remove the roof. The black house at Arnol was inhabited until the 1960s, at which point the owner moved into a newly built white house, named because they had lime-washed walls and chimneys, and therefore most of the smoke and soot left the house that way. As soon as the owner moved to their new house, the old black house was given to the state for preservation. The white house she moved into was also eventually donated to the state and is now the ticket office for the site. Opposite the preserved black house is an example of how the buildings look once their roofs have gone. The next stop on the tour was the lunch break at the beach at Dalmore. Dalmore is a small hamlet to the north of the much larger settlement of Carloway on the west coast of Lewis. The hamlet has a beach and, overlooking it, a large cemetery. The beach is a known surf destination mentioned in numerous guidebooks, though to note due to the geography of the beach and the bay, a strong rip current exists at the north end of the beach. The wide sandy beach and on a calm day clear blue seas make this look almost like a tropical resort, though it's worth remembering this is the North Atlantic before dipping your toes in water that never gets much above 14 degrees Celsius. In August 2016, the beauty of the beach was threatened when the Transocean winner oil rig ran aground on the headland just off the beach whilst en route from Norway to Malta after becoming detached from the tugboat that was hauling it. At one point, there were fears of a major environmental disaster as around 12,000 gallons of diesel fuel were released from the rig's damaged tanks. The rig was eventually refloated and towed to a more sheltered location before being patched up enough to transport it to Turkey for scrapping. If the name Transocean rings a bell, they're the owners, but not the operators, of a Deepwater Horizon rig, responsible for the largest marine oil spill in history. From Dalmore, it's back onto the van and through Carloway to the other side of the town, and also back nearly 2,000 years in time to the Broch at Carloway. A broch is an Iron Age dry stone hollow-walled structure, usually a roundhouse, found across Scotland, built between 100 BC and 100 AD. They were designed at a time when blending into the rocky countryside was the best defence against being attacked, but if that didn't stop an attack, a highly defendable abode might help. The ruins of the Broch at Carloway are a particularly good example, with the eastern side of the walls almost perfectly preserved up to their original height, whilst the long since collapsed and removed western walls allow an almost scientifically perfect cross-section of the structure. It's easy to make out the two concentric rings of walls for the passageway and access to the upper floors of the structure, hidden between the two sets of walls. The Broch still appeared to be intact and in occasional use up until the 16th century, but over the following years, most of the outer wall had disappeared, with the stones being reused in other buildings. By 1881, the Broch was pretty much in the state it is in today, because in 1882 it became one of the first officially protected monuments in Scotland. A few miles further on, and a few thousand years more back in time, and we reach the final stop of the day at the standing stones at Callanish. To note, according to our guide, the stones are normally much quieter with far fewer visitors, but this was June the 21st, the summer solstice, and there are quite a few more visitors, with many of them communing with the stones. The stones are placed in a cruciform pattern with a central stone circle from above resembling a Celtic cross. The central circle is of 13 stones with a monolith near the middle. Five rows of standing stones connect to this circle, two long rows of stones running almost parallel to each other forming an avenue, with three shorter rows coming out at almost 90 degrees to each other from the central ring to form the cross pattern. The central monolith stands just to the west of the centre of the stone circle, is 4.8 metres high, 1.5 metres wide and 0.3 metres thick, and is estimated to weigh about 7 tonnes. The largest sides of the stone are almost perfectly oriented north-south. The stone circle has a diameter of 11.4 metres, with the 13 stones having an average height of 3 metres. Close to the monolith inside the stone ring is a chambered tomb that's 6.4 metres long and is believed to have been built later than the stone circle. It's believed the stones were erected around 5,000 years ago in the late Neolithic era and were a focus for ritual activity during the Bronze Age. The stones themselves are just one of several sets of stone circles that dot the landscape nearby. Today they're officially called Callanish 1 to differentiate themselves from sets 2, 3, 4, 8 and 10, which are all nearby. The existence of so many other monuments in the area implies Callanish was an active focus for prehistoric religious activity for at least 1,500 years. Stornoway Airport has regular Loganair services to Glasgow, Edinburgh and Inverness airports, taking less than an hour to each, from where there are connections to the major European hubs of London, Frankfurt, Amsterdam and Paris, as well as connections across the other Scottish islands and the rest of the UK. CalMax MV Lock Seaforth flies the Stornoway to Ullapool route usually twice a day, taking around 2.5 hours to cross the Minch. From Ullapool, Scottish CityLink services to Inverness connect with the ferry, taking 80 minutes to drive across Scotland to the Highland capital.